The gunshot pierced the quiet afternoon air, sending Odessa Vale's heart racing as she stood trembling on the makeshift auction platform in the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1875. The crowd of rowdy, whiskey-soaked men fell silent as the tall figure pushed through them, his weathered Stetson pulled low over stormy blue eyes that surveyed the scene with unmistakable disgust. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed gathering. The auctioneer, a greasy-haired man with tobacco-stained teeth, froze mid-sentence with his hand still raised in the air. "This here's a legal auction, mister," the auctioneer protested, though his voice wavered. Her pa signed the papers fair and square. Odessa clutched the tattered remains of her shawl around her shoulders, humiliation burning her cheeks as she watched the stranger approach. 20 years old and being sold like livestock to settle her father's gambling debts, she'd never imagined her life could sink so low. The stranger reached the platform in 4 long strides. Up close, Odessa could see the trail dust on his long duster coat and the grim set of his jaw beneath several days' worth of stubble. "How much?" he asked simply. The auctioneer licked his lips nervously. "Well, we was just getting started. But I reckon that fine McClellan saddle you got on your horse would cover it." The stranger's eyes narrowed dangerously. "A saddle for a human being. It's a mighty fine saddle," the auctioneer said with a shrug, "and her pa's debts ain't that substantial." Without a word, the stranger turned and strode to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion waiting patiently at the hitching post. With efficient movements, he unbuckled the saddle and hoisted it onto his shoulder. The crowd parted as he returned, tossing the saddle at the auctioneer's feet. "There, we done?" he asked, his voice hard as iron. The auctioneer nodded quickly, scrambling to retrieve a folded document from his vest pocket. "Just need to sign the transfer papers." The stranger scrawled something across the bottom of the page before turning to Odessa. For the first time, his expression softened slightly as he extended a calloused hand toward her. "Madam," he said simply. Odessa hesitated, looking from his hand to his face, searching for any sign of the cruelty she'd come to expect from men. Finding none, she placed her trembling fingers in his palm and allowed him to help her down from the platform. As they walked toward his horse, the auctioneer called out, "Hey, cowboy, you overpaid. She ain't worth half that saddle." The stranger stopped abruptly, turning back with such controlled fury that the auctioneer took an involuntary step backward. "She's worth more than 10 herds," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "And any man here who thinks different can answer to me." No one spoke as he helped Odessa onto his horse, mounting up behind her with easy grace. As they rode out of town, Odessa realized she didn't even know the name of the man who had just purchased her freedom with nothing more than a saddle and a dangerous glare. "My name is Odessa," she ventured after they'd ridden in silence for nearly half an hour. "Odessa Vale. Wyatt Quinn," he replied, his voice softer now that they were away from town. "And I didn't buy you, Miss Vale. That paper I signed was your deed of manumission. You're free to go wherever you please once we reach the next town." Odessa twisted in the saddle to look up at him, bewilderment clouding her features. "Then why, no decent man stands by while a woman is sold like property," he said simply, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Not in this territory or any other." As the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the plains, Odessa found herself studying the profile of the mysterious cowboy who had risked everything for a stranger. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair unfurling in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The trail before them stretched endlessly into the gathering dusk, and Odessa wondered what lay ahead. But for now, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the solid presence of the man behind her were enough to keep the darkness at bay. They made camp as night fell, in a small protected hollow near a shallow creek. Wyatt worked efficiently, caring for his horse before setting up a modest camp. Odessa watched him move with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to life on the trail, his actions economical and purposeful. "You can sleep there," he said, gesturing to a bedroll he'd laid out near the small fire. "I'll keep watch." "You don't need to treat me like I'll break, Mr. Quinn," Odessa said, lifting her chin slightly. "I've survived worse than sleeping on hard ground." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps. "I don't doubt it, Miss Vale. Please call me Odessa. After what you did today, formalities seem unnecessary." He nodded once. "Odessa, then, and I'm Wyatt." As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Odessa found herself studying him openly. In the firelight, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the sun rather than age. "Where are you headed?" she asked finally, breaking the companionable silence that had settled between them. "North to Montana Territory. I've got land there, a ranch, the beginnings of one," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Nothing grand yet, but the valley's good for cattle, plenty of water, good grazing." Odessa wrapped her arms around her knees, staring into the dancing flames. "My father had a small spread once before the drink took him. I know how to work cattle, mend fences." She paused, then added more quietly, "Before everything fell apart, I was good at it." Wyatt didn't respond immediately, and when Odessa glanced up, she found him watching her with an unreadable expression. "What happened?" he asked finally, Odessa's fingers twisted in the worn fabric of her skirt. "My mother died 3 winters back, consumption. After that, Pa just gave up. Started drinking, gambling, lost the ranch bit by bit." Her voice grew bitter. "Then he lost me too." "Where is he now?" "Dead," Odessa said flatly. "Shot in a saloon fight last month, left nothing but debts." Wyatt tossed another stick onto the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the night sky. "And you've got no family to go to?" She shook her head. "No one. I was trying to find work as a housekeeper or laundress when they caught up with me. Said I was part of my father's estate, to be sold to cover what he owed." "That's not legal," Wyatt said, anger threading through his voice. "Not much is legal in towns like Redemption Creek, unless you've got the money or the gun to make it so," Odessa replied with a weary shrug. "And I had neither." They fell silent again, the crackling of the fire and the occasional distant howl of a coyote the only sounds disturbing the night. "What will you do now?" Wyatt asked eventually. Odessa stared into the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "I don't know," she admitted. "Find work somewhere, I suppose. Save enough to maybe head east where no one knows me or my father's reputation." Wyatt nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "There's a town about 2 days' ride from here. Cedar Ridge, decent enough place. I know the sheriff there, he's a good man. He might be able to help you find work." "Thank you," Odessa said softly, "for everything." Wyatt merely nodded, his eyes returning to the fire. "Get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow." As Odessa settled onto the bedroll, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin, she found herself studying the cowboy's profile against the starlit sky. There was something comforting about his quiet strength, something that made her feel safer than she had in longer than she could remember. Sleep claimed her quickly, the exhaustion of the day's events finally catching up with her. Her last conscious thought was that perhaps, just perhaps, her luck had finally changed. The dawn broke cold and clear, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Odessa woke to the smell of coffee and the quiet sounds of Wyatt moving around the camp. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then memory returned in a rush, and she sat up quickly. "Morning," Wyatt said, glancing up from where he was crouched by the small fire. "Coffee's ready if you want some." Odessa pushed back the blanket and stood, stretching discreetly to ease the stiffness from her muscles. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth of it between her palms was welcome in the chill morning air. "We should reach Cedar Ridge by tomorrow evening if the weather holds," Wyatt said as he began to pack up their small camp. Odessa nodded, watching him over the rim of her cup. In the clear light of morning, she could see him better, the breadth of his shoulders, the lean strength in his movements, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. His eyes, when they met hers, were the deep blue of a mountain lake. "I want to pay you back," she said suddenly. "For the saddle," Wyatt's movements stilled. "That's not necessary." "It is to me," Odessa insisted. "I pay my debts, Mr. Quinn, always have." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Back to Mr. Quinn now, are we?" Odessa felt heat rise to her cheeks, but held his gaze steadily. "Wyatt, then, but I mean what I say. I'll find work in Cedar Ridge and send you the money as soon as I can." He studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "If it matters that much to you, we can discuss it when we reach town. For now, we should get moving." They rode in companionable silence for much of the morning, the land around them gradually changing from flat plains to rolling hills, dotted with juniper and sage. Odessa found herself appreciating the solid presence of the man behind her, the way he handled the horse with gentle confidence, the occasional comments he made about the land they passed through. "You know this country well," she observed when they stopped briefly to rest the horse. Wyatt nodded, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "Drove cattle through here for years before I saved enough to buy my own place. And you're building your ranch alone, for now," he said. "Hired a couple of hands last season for the roundup, good men. They'll be back this year if all goes well." Odessa felt a pang of envy at the simple clarity of his plans. "It must be nice, knowing exactly what you're working toward." Wyatt glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Took me a long time to get here. Made plenty of mistakes along the way." "What kind of mistakes?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. A shadow crossed his face. "The kind that leave scars," he said simply, then turned away to check the horse's girth before she could respond. They were back on the trail minutes later, and Odessa sensed that whatever brief window into his past had opened was now firmly closed again. She didn't press, content instead to watch the land unfold before them, miles of untamed wilderness stretching to the horizon in every direction. Around midday, Wyatt tensed suddenly behind her, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. "What is it?" Odessa whispered, instantly alert. "Riders," he said, his voice low and taut, "coming fast from the east." Squinting against the sun, Odessa could just make out a cloud of dust rising in the distance. "Could be anyone." "Could be," Wyatt agreed, but his posture remained vigilant. "But we're not taking chances. There's a stand of trees ahead. We'll wait there, see who they are before they see us." He urged the horse into a faster pace, heading for the copse of cottonwoods that marked a bend in the creek they'd been following. Under the cover of the trees, Wyatt dismounted quickly, then helped Odessa down. "Stay behind me," he murmured, leading the horse deeper into the shadows of the trees. The thunder of approaching hooves grew louder, and soon Odessa could make out 4 riders coming hard down the trail they'd just left. Her heart sank as she recognized the bulky silhouette of the auctioneer from Redemption Creek. "They're looking for us," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. Wyatt's expression hardened. "I signed those papers. You're free and clear. You think that matters to men like that?" Odessa asked bitterly. "They saw a chance for profit walk away. They won't let it go easily." The riders slowed as they reached the place where Wyatt and Odessa had left the trail, scanning the ground for signs of their passage. The auctioneer said something to his companions, pointing toward the creek. "If they find us," Odessa asked quietly. Wyatt's hand rested on his revolver. "They won't take you back," he said, his voice so low and dangerous that a shiver ran down Odessa's spine. One of the riders dismounted, crouching to examine the ground. After a moment, he looked up, pointing directly toward the trees where they hid. "They've seen our tracks," Odessa breathed. Wyatt moved with sudden decision, taking her arm. "Can you ride alone?" "Yes, but take the horse. Follow the creek north. I'll catch up." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Odessa protested. Wyatt's eyes met hers, intense and unyielding. "This isn't a discussion. Go now while they're still far enough out." Something in his face told Odessa that argument would be futile. With a quick nod, she allowed him to help her onto the horse. "North along the creek," he repeated. "Don't stop until you reach the high rocks about 3 miles up. Wait for me there." "Be careful," she said, gathering the reins. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always am." With a final nod, Odessa urged the horse forward, staying under the cover of the trees as long as possible before breaking into the open. Behind her, she heard shouts as the men spotted her, then the sharp crack of a gunshot. She didn't look back, focusing instead on guiding the horse across the shallow creek and up the opposite bank, heading north as Wyatt had instructed. The terrain grew rougher as she rode, the creek cutting deeper between rocky banks. Odessa pushed the horse as hard as she dared on the uneven ground, her heart pounding in time with the animal's hoofbeats. More gunshots echoed in the distance, and she offered up a silent prayer for Wyatt's safety. After what seemed like an eternity, the high rocks Wyatt had mentioned came into view, a dramatic outcropping of reddish stone rising from the creek bank like sentinels. Odessa guided the horse into a natural hollow behind the largest boulder, dismounting quickly to lead the animal deeper into the sheltered space. Only then did she allow herself to pause, listening intently for any sound of pursuit. The distant retort of gunfire had ceased, leaving only the rushing of the creek and the wind sighing through the scattered pines. Odessa stroked the horse's neck, murmuring soothing words as she tried to calm her own racing thoughts. What if Wyatt didn't come? What if those men had? She cut the thought short, refusing to consider it. Instead, she busied herself checking the horse, making sure it hadn't been injured in their headlong flight. The animal seemed tired but unharmed, and Odessa allowed herself to relax slightly, settling on a sun-warmed rock to wait. The minutes stretched endlessly. Odessa found herself straining to hear any approaching sound, her nerves jumping at every rustle of wind through the brush. The sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, and still there was no sign of Wyatt. Just as she was starting to consider what she would do if night fell with no word from him, the soft scuff of a boot against stone brought her to her feet, her hand reaching instinctively for the knife in her boot, the one possession her father's creditors hadn't taken. "It's me," Wyatt's voice called softly before he appeared around the edge of the boulder. Relief flooded through Odessa so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "You're alive," she breathed. "Told you I'd catch up," he said, but his voice lacked its usual steadiness. As he stepped into the hollow, Odessa gasped. Blood stained the left sleeve of his shirt, and a dark bruise was forming along his jawline. "You're hurt," she said, moving quickly to his side. "It's nothing." "Bullet grazed my arm is all," Wyatt said dismissively, though he didn't protest when she led him to the rock where she'd been sitting. "Let me see," Odessa insisted, already reaching for his sleeve. With a sigh that might have held a trace of amusement, Wyatt submitted to her examination. The wound was indeed a graze, but it had bled freely, soaking his shirt sleeve. "We need to clean this," Odessa said, glancing around the hollow. "Is the creek water clean enough?" "Clean enough," Wyatt confirmed. "There's a canteen in my saddlebag and a spare shirt." Odessa retrieved both items, along with a small tin of what proved to be healing salve. Working efficiently, she helped Wyatt remove his bloodied shirt, trying to ignore the sudden flutter in her stomach at the sight of his bare chest and shoulders, bronzed by the sun and corded with lean muscle. "Those men?" she asked as she poured water over the wound, focusing on her task rather than on the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. "Won't be bothering us again," Wyatt said grimly. Odessa's hands stilled. "You killed them." "No," he said, meeting her eyes steadily. "But I made it clear what would happen if they kept coming after you. The auctioneer's nursing a broken arm to remember me by." 4 against 1, Odessa murmured, resuming her work. "Those aren't good odds." A faint smile touched Wyatt's lips. "They weren't expecting me to circle around behind them. Element of surprise counts for a lot." Odessa shook her head slightly as she spread salve over the wound. "You could have been killed because of me." "Because of them," Wyatt corrected, his voice hardening. Men who think they can own people don't deserve mercy. There was something in his tone that made Odessa look up sharply, a depth of feeling that suggested personal experience. "You've seen this before," she said, realization dawning, "something like this." Wyatt's expression closed off, but he nodded once. "War showed me plenty of man's inhumanity to man, some things you don't forget. You fought for the Union," Odessa guessed, helping him into the clean shirt. "Last 2 years of the war," he confirmed, "wasn't much older than you are now." Odessa finished buttoning his shirt, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the lingering touch of her fingers against the rough cotton covering his chest. She drew back slightly, busying herself with repacking the medical supplies. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming back for me." "For everything." Wyatt's eyes held hers for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. "We should get moving," he said finally, standing and offering her his hand. "Still a few hours of daylight left, and I'd like to put more distance between us and those men." Odessa accepted his help, ignoring the small thrill that ran through her at the touch of his calloused palm against hers. As they prepared to leave their temporary shelter, she found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, wondering at the complexity of this quiet, dangerous man who had risked everything for a stranger. They rode double again, but this time Wyatt allowed Odessa to take the reins, his injured arm resting lightly at her waist. The contact was oddly intimate, and Odessa found herself acutely aware of his presence behind her, the warmth of his chest against her back, the subtle scent of leather and pine that clung to him. The afternoon wore on, the landscape gradually shifting as they rode north. Pine forests began to appear more frequently, breaking up the open prairie, and the distant silhouette of mountains grew more distinct on the horizon. "Beautiful country," Odessa commented as they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. "Gets in your blood," Wyatt agreed, his voice warm with affection for the land. "First time I saw Montana territory, I knew I'd never want to leave." "Is that where we're headed, Montana?" Wyatt was silent for a moment. "Cedar Ridge is just over the territorial line." "We'll reach it tomorrow, like I said. After that, it's your choice." Odessa nodded, keeping her eyes on the trail ahead. The thought of parting ways with Wyatt in Cedar Ridge left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. In the short time they'd been together, she'd come to rely on his steady presence, his quiet strength. The prospect of facing the world alone again was more daunting than she wanted to admit. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, with a small spring providing fresh water. Despite his injury, Wyatt insisted on handling most of the camp duties, though he accepted Odessa's help in preparing a more substantial meal than they'd had the previous night. Rabbit that Wyatt shot along the trail, supplemented with wild onions that Odessa gathered near the spring. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Wyatt asked as they ate, genuine appreciation in his voice. Odessa smiled faintly. "My mother taught me. She said a woman should know how to make something from nothing." The memory brought both warmth and a familiar ache of loss. "She was good at that, making do with whatever we had." "Sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Odessa agreed softly. "Strong, kind, never complained even when times were hard." She glanced up at Wyatt. "Your family, are they still in the East?" A shadow crossed his face. "Gone. Ma died when I was 12, Pa a few years later." "I'm sorry," Odessa said, recognizing the same grief she carried reflected in his eyes. Wyatt shrugged slightly. "Was a long time ago." "Doesn't make it hurt less," Odessa observed quietly. His eyes met hers across the fire, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." They fell into companionable silence as night deepened around them, the vast canopy of stars spreading overhead like diamonds scattered across velvet. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across their small camp. "You should take the bedroll again," Wyatt said eventually. "I'll keep watch." Odessa frowned. "You're injured. You need rest more than I do." "I've slept rough before," he countered. "So have I," Odessa insisted. "At least share the blanket." There's no sense in you catching your death of cold while I'm perfectly comfortable. Wyatt's eyebrows rose slightly at her forthright manner, but after a moment he nodded. All right, but I'll still take first watch, wake you in a few hours. True to his word, Wyatt gently shook Odessa awake sometime in the deepest part of the night. She stirred, momentarily disoriented by the darkness and the unfamiliar weight of his hand on her shoulder. Your turn, he murmured. Fire's still good. I haven't heard anything concerning. Odessa sat up, pulling the blanket more tightly around her shoulders against the chill night air. Get some rest, she told him. I'll wake you at first light. Wyatt settled onto the bedroll she had vacated, his movements careful to favor his injured arm. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, the lines of tension easing from his face in the quiet darkness. Odessa found herself watching him, struck by how much younger he looked in repose. The hardness that seemed so much a part of him was softened by sleep, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the careful armor he wore, a man who had risked his life for her without hesitation, a man who treated her with a respect she had almost forgotten she deserved. A dangerous train of thought, she told herself firmly, tearing her gaze away to scan the surrounding darkness. Wyatt Quinn had been kind, yes, but that didn't mean anything beyond common decency. Tomorrow they would reach Cedar Ridge and she would find work, repay her debt to him, and they would go their separate ways. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it left her with an emptiness she couldn't quite explain. The dawn came soft and gray, with a fine mist hanging over the land. Odessa had maintained her vigil through the night, allowing Wyatt to sleep undisturbed until the first hint of light touched the eastern sky. Only then did she move to wake him, touching his shoulder gently. "Wyatt," she said softly, "it's morning." He came awake instantly, his hand moving to the revolver beside him before his eyes had fully opened. When he saw Odessa, he relaxed, sitting up with a slight wince as the movement pulled at his injured arm. "You should have woken me earlier," he said, noting the shadows beneath her eyes. Odessa shrugged. "You needed the rest. How's the arm?" "Stiff, but it'll do," he said, rolling his shoulder experimentally. "Let's get moving. We can make Cedar Ridge by midday if we push." They broke camp quickly and were on the trail as the sun burned through the morning mist, casting long shadows across the dew-damp grass. The day promised to be fine, with a gentle breeze tempering the growing warmth of the sun. As they rode, Odessa found herself memorizing the details of this journey, the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the solid presence of Wyatt behind her, the vast, untamed beauty of the land stretching in every direction. Whatever happened in Cedar Ridge, she knew these memories would stay with her. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after they had ridden in silence for some time. Wyatt seemed surprised by the question, but after a moment he began to speak, his voice warming as he described the valley he had claimed as his own. He painted a picture of meadows rich with grass, a clear creek running through the property, the cabin he had built with his own hands over the course of a summer. "It's not much yet," he said, "but there's good water, good grazing, room to grow." "It sounds beautiful," Odessa said, trying to imagine the place he described. "Peaceful." "It is," Wyatt agreed. "Though lonely at times," he added, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. Before she could respond to that unexpected admission, he stiffened behind her, his attention focused on something ahead. "Riders," he said, his voice returning to its usual guarded tone. "3 of them coming this way." Odessa tensed, remembering their last encounter. "The men from Redemption Creek." "Don't think so," Wyatt said, studying the approaching figures. "Different horses, and they're not pushing hard like men on a chase." As the riders drew closer, Odessa could make out 2 men and a woman traveling at an easy pace. They appeared to be a family group, with an older man riding slightly ahead of a younger couple. Wyatt relaxed slightly, though his hand remained near his revolver. "Homesteaders, most likely," he murmured. "Still, let me do the talking." The travelers hailed them as they came within speaking distance, the older man raising his hand in greeting. "Morning," he called. Fine day for traveling. Wyatt nodded in acknowledgement. That it is. You folks headed far, Cedar Ridge, the man replied. Name's Thomas Gardner. This is my son James and his wife Sarah. Wyatt Quinn, Wyatt responded. And this is Miss Odessa Vale. We're bound for Cedar Ridge ourselves. The woman Sarah smiled warmly at Odessa. Always good to meet another woman out here. We've been on the trail nearly a month from Kansas. Looking to settle? Wyatt asked. The elder Gardner nodded. Bought land sight unseen from the railroad company, hoping it's half as good as they claimed. Whereabout is your claim? Wyatt asked, and the conversation turned to the practicalities of land and water rights, the condition of the trail ahead. News from the territories they had passed through. Odessa found herself drawn into conversation with Sarah, grateful for the easy companionship of another woman after so many days in male company. Sarah was perhaps a few years older than Odessa, with a practical manner and a ready smile. You and your husband heading to Cedar Ridge to settle as well? Sarah asked innocently. Heat rushed to Odessa's cheeks. Oh, no, Mr. Quinn and I aren't married. He helped me out of a difficult situation. He's taking me to Cedar Ridge to find work. Sarah looked embarrassed by her mistake. I'm sorry, I just assumed. It's all right, Odessa assured her quickly. An easy misunderstanding. If Wyatt had overheard this exchange, he gave no sign of it, continuing his conversation with the Gardner men. Eventually, it was decided that they would all travel together for the remainder of the journey to Cedar Ridge, a proposition that brought obvious relief to Sarah. It'll be nice to have another woman to talk to, she said with a smile. The men mean well, but there's only so much discussion of soil conditions and cattle prices a person can stand. Odessa laughed, finding herself warming to the friendly young woman. As they continued their journey, now part of a small caravan, she couldn't help noticing how the dynamic had shifted. Wyatt rode beside her now rather than behind her, their bodies no longer sharing the intimate contact of before. She told herself it was a relief, yet she missed the security of his arm around her waist, the warmth of him at her back. The day progressed pleasantly, with conversation making the miles pass more quickly. By early afternoon, the first signs of civilization appeared on the horizon: smoke from chimneys, the distant glint of sunlight on glass windows. Cedar Ridge, Thomas Gardner announced with satisfaction. Made good time today. As they drew closer to the town, Odessa felt anxiety beginning to build in her chest. Cedar Ridge was considerably larger than Redemption Creek, with proper streets laid out in a grid, substantial buildings of wood and brick, even a church steeple rising above the other structures. It was a real town, with real opportunities and real dangers. You all right? Wyatt asked quietly, noticing her tension. Odessa nodded, not trusting her voice. The prospect of saying goodbye to him suddenly seemed much more immediate, much more final. The Gardner family took their leave as they entered the town proper, heading for the land office to register their claim. Wyatt guided their horse down the main street, past a bustling general store, a hotel, several saloons, and various businesses that spoke of a prosperous community. Sheriff's office is down this way, he said, turning onto a side street. Figured we'd start there. Owen's a good man. He'll know if anyone's hiring. The sheriff's office was a modest but well-maintained building with a small jail attached to the rear. Wyatt dismounted first, then helped Odessa down, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. Ready? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Odessa straightened her shoulders and nodded. Ready. The interior of the office was cool and orderly, with wanted posters neatly tacked to one wall and a large desk dominating the main room. The man behind the desk looked up as they entered, his weathered face breaking into a grin at the sight of Wyatt. Quinn, you old son of a gun, he exclaimed, rising to his feet. Didn't expect to see you until the spring drive. Plans changed, Wyatt said simply, stepping forward to shake the sheriff's hand. Good to see you, Owen. Sheriff Owen's sharp eyes moved from Wyatt to Odessa, curiosity evident in his expression. "And who might this be, Miss Odessa Vale?" Wyatt said formally. "Odessa, this is Sheriff David Owen. We served together in the war, Miss Vale," Owen said, tipping his hat respectfully. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge." "Thank you, Sheriff," Odessa replied, relieved by his courteous manner. "Miss Vale is looking for employment in town," Wyatt explained. "Thought you might know who's hiring." Owen leaned back against his desk, considering. "As it happens, Martha Wilson over at the hotel was just complaining about needing help. Her last girl left to get married last month, and she's been running herself ragged trying to keep up with the rooms and the dining room both." Relief washed through Odessa. "I have experience as a housekeeper," she said eagerly, "and I can cook as well." "Then Martha will likely hire you on the spot," Owen said with a chuckle. "Hotel's just up the street, can't miss it. 2 stories, green shutters." "Thank you," Odessa said sincerely. Owen turned his attention back to Wyatt. "And you, Quinn, just passing through or staying a while?" Wyatt's eyes flickered briefly to Odessa before returning to the sheriff. "Haven't decided yet. Need to restock supplies before heading back to the ranch." "Well, you know you're always welcome to bunk here if you don't want to spend money at the hotel," Owen offered. "Got a spare cot in the back room." "Appreciate it," Wyatt said with a nod. An awkward silence fell, and Odessa realized that the moment of parting had arrived. This was it. She would go to the hotel to seek employment, and Wyatt would. What, stay with his friend, return to his ranch? Either way, their paths were diverging. "I should go speak with Mrs. Wilson," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "Thank you again for your help, Sheriff Owen." "My pleasure, Miss Vale," Owen replied. Odessa turned to Wyatt, finding it suddenly difficult to meet his eyes. "And thank you, Mr. Quinn, for everything. I won't forget what you did for me." Something flickered in Wyatt's expression: disappointment, resignation. Before she could identify it, his features had settled back into their usual composed lines. "I'll walk you to the hotel," he said. "Make sure you get settled." Outside, the afternoon sun had taken on the golden quality of approaching evening, casting long shadows down the dusty street. They walked in silence, the space between them feeling wider than the few inches that actually separated them. The hotel was exactly as the sheriff had described: a handsome 2-story building with freshly painted green shutters and a wide porch out front. A discreet sign identified it as the Wilson house. At the base of the steps, Wyatt stopped. "This is it," he said unnecessarily. Odessa nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. "I'll send money for the saddle as soon as I've saved enough," she promised. "Keep your money," Wyatt said firmly. "I meant what I said. You don't owe me anything." "But I want to consider it a gift," he interrupted, his voice gentle but allowing no argument. "A fresh start." Odessa blinked rapidly, fighting unexpected tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "Live well," Wyatt said simply. "That's thanks enough." He stood there for a moment longer, as if wanting to say more, then stepped back with a small nod. "Goodbye, Odessa Vale." "Goodbye, Wyatt Quinn," she whispered, watching as he turned and walked away, his tall figure soon disappearing around the corner. Only then did she allow a single tear to fall, quickly brushed away with the back of her hand. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? Independence, safety, a chance to build a new life on her own terms. So why did it feel like she was losing something precious instead of gaining her freedom? With a deep breath, Odessa straightened her shoulders and climbed the steps to the hotel entrance. Whatever her confused feelings for Wyatt Quinn, they would have to wait. Right now, she had a job to secure and a future to build. The interior of the Wilson house was neat and welcoming, with polished wooden floors, comfortable-looking furniture in the small lobby, and the appetizing scent of cooking wafting from somewhere in the back. A bell on the front desk summoned a harried-looking woman of perhaps 50, her gray-streaked hair escaping from its pins and her apron showing signs of the day's work. "Yes, can I help you?" she asked, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Mrs. Wilson." My name is Odessa Vale. Sheriff Owen suggested I speak with you about employment. The woman's tired expression brightened immediately. The sheriff sent you. Oh, thank heavens. Are you experienced with housekeeping? Yes, madam, Odessa replied. I can clean, cook, launder, whatever you need. Martha Wilson studied her appraisingly for a moment, then nodded decisively. You're hired. When can you start? The abruptness of the offer took Odessa by surprise. Immediately, I suppose, though I don't have much in the way of belongings. Not a problem, Mrs. Wilson assured her. There's a room for staff in the back, and we can advance you a bit of your wages to get whatever you need from the general store. She looked more closely at Odessa, her expression softening. You look like you've had a rough time of it, dear. Odessa managed a small smile. It's been a challenging few weeks. Mrs. Wilson nodded understandingly. Well, you're safe here. Cedar Ridge is a good town, and I run a respectable establishment. She gestured for Odessa to follow her. Come along, I'll show you where you'll be staying and explain your duties. The next few hours passed in a blur of information as Mrs. Wilson showed Odessa around the hotel, introducing her to the cook, Mr. Wilson, a jovial man with a magnificent mustache, and the young boy who helped with the heavier chores. The staff quarters turned out to be a small but clean room at the back of the hotel with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the kitchen garden. It's not fancy, Mrs. Wilson apologized, but it's private and warm. It's perfect, Odessa assured her, thinking of the nights she'd spent sleeping in barns or huddled in corners of her father's decrepit cabin after it had been stripped of anything valuable. This small room represented security she hadn't known in years. By the time evening fell, Odessa had been fitted out with a proper uniform, given a small advance on her wages to purchase necessities, and already put to work helping serve dinner in the hotel's dining room. The work was straightforward, if tiring, and the guests were largely polite. Mrs. Wilson proved to be a fair employer, strict but not unkind, and quick to offer guidance when needed. As Odessa fell into bed that night, exhausted but satisfied with her first day's work, her thoughts inevitably turned to Wyatt. Was he staying at the sheriff's office, as Owen had offered? Or had he already left town, heading back to his ranch in Montana Territory? The thought of him riding away, perhaps never to be seen again, left a hollow feeling in her chest that she tried unsuccessfully to ignore. Don't be foolish, she whispered to herself in the darkness. He did his good deed. It's over now. Yet sleep was long in coming, and when it did, her dreams were filled with the memory of stormy blue eyes and the solid warmth of a presence at her back. The next few days settled into a routine of hard work and gradual adjustment to her new life. Odessa proved herself to be a valuable addition to the hotel staff, quick to learn and willing to take on any task. Mrs. Wilson expressed her approval more than once, and even Mr. Wilson, who generally left the running of the hotel to his wife, commented on Odessa's cooking skills after she stepped in to help prepare breakfast one morning when the regular cook was ill. On her third day in Cedar Ridge, Odessa finally found time to visit the general store to purchase some personal items with her advance. The store was well stocked, a testament to Cedar Ridge's growing prosperity, and the proprietor's wife was helpful in assisting Odessa with selecting fabric for a new dress and other necessities. As she was examining a display of hair combs, the bell over the door jingled, and Odessa glanced up automatically. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized Wyatt, his tall figure silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. He hadn't seen her yet, his attention focused on the list in his hand as he spoke with the store owner. For a moment, Odessa considered slipping out the side door to avoid an awkward encounter. But before she could move, Wyatt looked up and their eyes met across the crowded store. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, and perhaps something else she couldn't identify. After a brief hesitation, he made his way toward her, weaving between other customers with easy grace. "Miss Vale," he said formally, tipping his hat, "you're looking well." Mr. Quinn, she replied, equally formal, though her heart was racing beneath her composed exterior. I didn't realize you were still in town. Just finishing up some business, he said. Heading out tomorrow. I see. Odessa tried to ignore the pang of disappointment his words evoked. Back to your ranch, he nodded. Spring roundup's coming. Got preparations to make. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. Odessa searched for something to fill it, anything to prolong this unexpected meeting. I've found employment at the hotel, she said finally. Mrs. Wilson has been very kind. Good, Wyatt said, genuine warmth entering his voice. I'm glad it's working out for you. Yes, it's a fresh start, like you said. Another silence, this one heavier than the last. Well, Wyatt said eventually, I should let you get back to your shopping. Of course, Odessa agreed quickly. And you have preparations to make, he hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. Take care of yourself, Odessa. The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. You too, Wyatt. He turned to go, and Odessa felt a sudden, irrational panic at the thought of watching him walk away again this time, perhaps for good. Wyatt, she called impulsively, causing him to turn back with raised eyebrows. I thank you again for everything. A small smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. You already thanked me. Yes, well, I meant it. His smile deepened slightly, reaching his eyes. So did I when I said you were worth more than 10 herds. Remember that, Odessa Vale. With that, he tipped his hat once more and was gone, leaving Odessa standing amid the displays of everyday goods, her heart beating an uneven rhythm in her chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur, her thoughts continually circling back to that brief encounter, to the way Wyatt had looked at her, to his parting words. Worth more than 10 herds. The memory of that first day, of standing trembling on the auction platform while men bid on her as if she were livestock, seemed impossibly distant now. Yet it had been less than a week ago. That night, as Odessa prepared for bed in her small room, she found herself standing at the window, gazing out at the stars visible above the rooftops of Cedar Ridge. Somewhere out there, Wyatt Quinn was making his final preparations to leave town. By this time tomorrow, he would be miles away, heading north to his ranch in Montana Territory. And she would be here, building a new life without him. The realization brought with it a clarity that had been missing in the tumult of the past week. In the short time they had spent together, Wyatt Quinn had become more than just her rescuer. He had become someone she cared for, someone whose absence would leave a void in her life that no amount of honest work or security could fill. The question was, what should she do about it? Sleep eluded her as she turned the problem over in her mind. By the time dawn lightened the eastern sky, Odessa had reached a decision. It might be foolish, it might end in rejection, but she had to try. She had to speak to Wyatt before he left town to tell him, what exactly? That she couldn't bear to watch him ride away. That in the space of a few days, he had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully explain. It didn't matter. She would find the words when the time came. For now, she needed to find him before it was too late. Rising quickly, Odessa dressed in her best dress, the new one she had purchased with her advance. A simple but becoming blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She twisted her hair into a neat bun, pinching her cheeks to bring color to them, and slipped out of the hotel before the rest of the household was stirring. The streets of Cedar Ridge were quiet in the early morning light, with only a few shopkeepers beginning to open their businesses. Odessa made her way directly to the sheriff's office, hoping that Wyatt was still there, that she wasn't too late. Her heart sank when she found the office empty except for Sheriff Owen, who was pouring himself a cup of coffee when she entered. Miss Vale, he said, clearly surprised to see her. Everything all right at the hotel? Yes, fine, Odessa assured him. I was actually looking for Mr. Quinn. Is he still in town? Owen's expression turned speculative, a knowing look entering his eyes. Wyatt left about half an hour ago, said he wanted to get an early start. Oh, Odessa said, unable to hide her disappointment. I see, thank you, Sheriff. She turned to leave, fighting back a wave of regret. She had waited too long, overthought everything as usual, and now her chance was gone. Miss Vale, Owen called as she reached the door, causing her to look back. He was headed north, following the creek trail. If someone happened to be riding a fast horse, they might catch up to him before he crosses the territorial line. Hope flared in Odessa's chest. Do you know where I might find such a horse, Sheriff? Owen smiled, reaching for a key hanging on the wall. As it happens, I've got a mare in the stable out back that needs some exercise. Fast little thing. You do know how to ride alone, I assume. I do, Odessa confirmed, gratitude welling up inside her. Thank you, Sheriff. I promise I'll bring her back safely. See that you do, Owen said, tossing her the key. And Miss Vale, tell that stubborn fool I said he's an idiot if he rides away from you twice. Odessa felt her cheeks flush, but she nodded, hurrying out to the small stable behind the sheriff's office. The mare proved to be a sleek sorrel with intelligent eyes, and a willingness to run that served Odessa well, as she guided the animal north out of town, following the winding creek that would eventually lead to the territorial border. The morning air was cool against her face as they rode, the sun just beginning to warm the land. Odessa scanned the trail ahead constantly, searching for any sign of a lone rider. The creek trail was relatively straight in this section, following the natural contours of the land, which gave her hope that she might spot Wyatt before too long. Nearly an hour passed with no sign of him, and Odessa began to fear that he had taken a different route, or that he was traveling faster than she had anticipated. The territorial border couldn't be more than a few miles ahead now, if she didn't find him soon. Then, as she crested a small rise, she saw him, a solitary figure on horseback, moving at an unhurried pace along the trail perhaps half a mile ahead. Relief washed through her, followed immediately by nervousness. What would she say to him? What if he didn't want to see her? Too late for doubts now. Odessa urged the mare to a faster pace, her heart pounding in time with the animal's hoofbeats. The distance between them closed rapidly, and soon she was close enough to call out, "Wyatt." He reined in sharply at the sound of her voice, turning in the saddle with an expression of disbelief. As Odessa drew alongside him, she could see the confusion in his eyes, the wariness mixed with something that might have been hope. "Odessa, what in God's name are you doing out here?" She drew the mare to a halt, suddenly breathless now that the moment had arrived. "I couldn't let you leave," she said simply, not without telling you something." Wyatt's expression was guarded, but he dismounted, moving to help her down from her horse. His hands at her waist were firm and gentle, lingering just a moment longer than necessary as her feet touched the ground. "What couldn't wait until I came back through Cedar Ridge?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Odessa took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't know when that would be, or if it would be, and I couldn't risk never seeing you again without saying this." She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away despite the heat she could feel rising in her cheeks. "You saved more than my life that day in Redemption Creek, Wyatt. You gave me back my dignity, my sense of worth. And in the days since, you've shown me what kind of man you truly are: honorable, brave, kind." Wyatt's expression had softened as she spoke, the guardedness giving way to something warmer, more vulnerable. "What I'm trying to say," Odessa continued, her voice growing steadier, "is that I care for you. More than I should, perhaps, given how little time we've known each other. But there it is." She smiled faintly. "I thought you should know that before you disappear into Montana territory." For a long moment, Wyatt was silent, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "I've been riding away from you for 3 days now," he said quietly. "Made it as far as the town limits twice before turning back. Spent the nights at Owen's telling myself I'd leave in the morning, for real this time." A rueful smile touched his lips. "This morning I finally made it out of town, and here you are, chasing me down." Hope bloomed in Odessa's chest. "Are you saying," I'm saying," Wyatt interrupted gently, "that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I saw you on that auction platform. That the thought of riding away from you for good has been tearing me apart." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. "I'm saying I care for you too, Odessa Vale, more than I've cared for anyone in a very long time." Joy, pure and unexpected, washed through Odessa. "Then why were you leaving?" "Because I thought it was what you wanted," Wyatt said simply. "A fresh start on your own terms, independence." "I didn't want to presume." Odessa laughed softly, leaning into his touch. "For two people who have been through what we have, we're remarkably bad at saying what we want." "And what do you want, Odessa?" Wyatt asked, his voice low and serious. She met his gaze steadily. "I want to see your ranch in Montana Territory. I want to know if it's as beautiful as you described. I want—" She took a deep breath. "I want a chance to see if what I feel for you could grow into something lasting." Wyatt's smile was slow and warm, transforming his face in a way that made Odessa's heart skip a beat. "I think that can be arranged," he said, his hand sliding from her cheek to cup the back of her neck. "If you're sure." "I'm sure," Odessa whispered. The distance between them vanished as Wyatt drew her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening as Odessa responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. The world narrowed to this moment, to the warmth of his mouth on hers, the solid strength of his arms around her. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I need to warn you," he said softly, "that ranch life isn't easy. It's hard work, long days, and the winters are brutal." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Odessa replied, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And I've survived worse winters than Montana can throw at me." Wyatt chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. "I believe you have." He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "There's one more thing you should know." "What's that?" "That cabin I told you about. It's not much to look at yet, sturdy enough but plain. It needs a woman's touch to make it a home." Odessa smiled up at him, her heart full. "I think I can help with that." Wyatt's answering smile was everything she could have hoped for, filled with warmth and promise and a future she could scarcely have imagined just days ago. "Then what do you say we head north, Odessa Vale? Montana's waiting." "Lead the way, Wyatt Quinn," she replied. "I'll be right beside you." As they mounted their horses and turned north together, the morning sun casting their long shadows across the trail ahead, Odessa felt a sense of rightness settle deep in her bones. The path forward might not be easy, but with Wyatt at her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges came their way, because she knew now, beyond any doubt, that she was worth more than 10 herds. She was worth fighting for, worth coming back for, worth loving. And that made all the difference. The journey north to Wyatt's ranch took nearly 2 weeks, days filled with steady riding and nights spent under the vast canopy of stars. Odessa had sent a letter back to Mrs. Wilson with Sheriff Owen, explaining her sudden departure and expressing gratitude for the brief employment. She had also included the advance wages Mrs. Wilson had given her, unwilling to leave with any debts unpaid. As they traveled, Odessa found herself falling more deeply in love not just with Wyatt, though her feelings for him grew stronger with each passing day, but with the land itself. Montana Territory unfurled before them like a painting come to life, sweeping vistas of grassland, forests of pine and aspen, mountains that seemed to touch the very sky. The air was clearer here, the colors more vivid, the sense of possibility almost tangible. "It's even more beautiful than you described," she told Wyatt as they crested a ridge overlooking a broad valley, the late afternoon sun gilding the landscape in shades of gold and amber. He smiled, reaching across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Wait until you see the ranch." We should make it by nightfall. True to his word, the sun was just beginning to set when they rounded a bend in the trail and Wyatt reined in his horse, gesturing ahead. "There it is, home." Odessa followed his gaze, taking in the scene before her. The valley was smaller than she had imagined, but perfect in its proportions, a natural bowl of lush grassland cradled between gentle slopes covered in pine and aspen. A creek meandered through the center of the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods. And there, nestled against the western slope where it would be protected from the worst of the winter winds, stood a cabin. It was indeed modest, as Wyatt had warned, a simple structure of hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch across the front. A smaller building nearby was clearly a barn with a corral attached. The entire scene was bathed in the golden light of sunset, giving it an almost ethereal quality. "Oh, Wyatt," Odessa breathed, unexpected tears pricking at her eyes. "It's perfect." Relief and pleasure mingled in his expression as he watched her reaction. "It's not much yet," he cautioned, "but there's room to expand the cabin when needed, and the land's good supports about 200 head of cattle now, but could handle twice that with proper management." Odessa smiled at his practical assessment. "Show me," she said simply. They rode down into the valley, and Odessa watched as the tension she hadn't even realized Wyatt was carrying seemed to melt from his shoulders the closer they got to the cabin. This was his home, the place he had built with his own hands, and bringing her here was an act of trust that she didn't take lightly. The interior of the cabin was as Wyatt had described, sturdy but plain, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a small bedroom partitioned off in one corner, and a loft space accessible by a ladder. The furnishings were minimal but well crafted: a table and chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, a bed visible through the partially open bedroom door. "You built all this yourself?" Odessa asked, running her hand along the smooth surface of the table. Wyatt nodded, watching her explore with an almost anxious expression. "The furniture, yes, had help with raising the cabin walls. Can't do that alone." "It's wonderful," she assured him, meaning it. The cabin might be simple, but it was solid and clean, with windows positioned to catch the morning light, and the fireplace placed to warm the entire space efficiently. Wyatt's expression relaxed at her approval. "It'll be more comfortable once we get a fire going," he said, moving to the hearth. "And there's a spring house out back where I keep perishables. Should have enough to make a decent meal tonight." As he busied himself with building a fire, Odessa continued her exploration, mentally noting the small touches that would make the cabin feel more like a home: curtains for the windows, perhaps a quilt for the bed, herbs hanging from the rafters. Simple things that would transform the functional space into a place of warmth and comfort. By the time full darkness had fallen, they had a fire crackling in the hearth, lamps lit, and a simple but satisfying meal prepared from the supplies Wyatt kept stored. Sitting across from him at the table, watching the lamplight play across his features as he described his plans for the spring roundup, Odessa felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked, catching her watching him. Odessa smiled, her heart full. "That I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." The look he gave her in response was so full of tenderness that it took her breath away. "I was beginning to think I'd never hear those words from anyone," he said quietly, "especially not from someone like you, someone like me. Someone brave enough to chase down a man who was too stubborn to admit what he wanted." Wyatt reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm glad you did, Odessa." "So am I," she said softly, "though I'm still not entirely sure what happens next." Wyatt's expression grew more serious. "That depends on what you want. If you're asking about practical matters, I've got 2 hands coming for the roundup next month, good men who worked for me last year. They'll bunk in the barn as they did before." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "If you're asking about us," Odessa nodded, her heart beating a little faster. "I am. Then I should tell you that in Cedar Ridge, there's a minister who comes through once a month to hold services. He'll be there in 2 weeks' time." Wyatt's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "If that's something you might be interested in." The implication was clear, and Odessa felt a flush of warmth spread through her. Are you proposing to me, Wyatt Quinn? A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Not very well, it seems. I think you're doing just fine, Odessa assured him, her own smile widening. And yes, that's something I would be very interested in. The tension in Wyatt's shoulders eased visibly. You're sure? It hasn't been long and this life isn't easy. I'm sure, Odessa said firmly. I've never been more sure of anything. Wyatt stood, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. Then I'll do this properly, he said, his voice low and serious. Odessa Vale, will you marry me? Will you build a life here with me, share my home, bear my children, grow old by my side? Tears of joy pricked at Odessa's eyes as she looked up at him. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. The kiss that followed sealed their promise, a testament to the unexpected journey that had brought them together and the future they would build side by side. 2 weeks later, they stood before the traveling minister in Cedar Ridge, exchanging vows in a simple ceremony witnessed by Sheriff Owen and a few other townspeople who had come to know them during their brief stays. Odessa wore a new dress of soft blue calico with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Wyatt wore the only suit he owned, looking both uncomfortable and impossibly handsome in the formal attire. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering broke into applause, genuine warmth in their congratulations. Even Martha Wilson had sent a small cake with her good wishes, delivered by Sheriff Owen, who had ridden out to the ranch to escort them to town for the ceremony. Never seen Quinn look so happy, Owen commented to Odessa during the modest celebration that followed. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Odessa laughed, her eyes finding Wyatt across the room where he was engaged in conversation with the local banker. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, a smile spreading across his face that was meant for her alone. I intend to, she told the sheriff, for the rest of our lives. The return journey to the ranch to their home had a different quality now, a sense of permanence and shared purpose that made even the familiar trail seem new. They arrived as the sun was setting, the cabin windows glowing with the last light of day. Wyatt dismounted first, then turned to lift Odessa down, his hands lingering at her waist. Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn, he said softly. The name, still new and wonderful to her ears, brought a smile to Odessa's lips. I like the sound of that. So do I, Wyatt admitted, drawing her closer. More than I can say. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, the ranch hands arriving earlier than expected for the spring roundup. Wyatt sighed, resting his forehead against hers for a moment before straightening. Duty calls, he said regretfully. But later. Later, Odessa agreed, a promise in her voice that brought a flush to Wyatt's cheeks. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as the roundup got underway. Odessa threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, working alongside Wyatt and the hands during the day, then returning to the cabin in the evenings to prepare meals and continue the process of turning the simple structure into a home. Curtains appeared at the windows, sewn from fabric purchased in Cedar Ridge. A quilt Odessa had started during quiet evenings gradually took shape on their bed. Wildflowers in mason jars brightened the table, and herbs from a small garden Odessa had planted began to hang from the rafters, filling the air with their fragrance. The ranch hands, initially wary of having a woman in what had been an all-male domain, soon warmed to Odessa's practical nature and excellent cooking. They treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence, especially after she proved herself capable of handling a horse as well as any of them, and unafraid of the hard work that ranch life demanded. By the time the roundup was complete and the cattle moved to summer pasture, Odessa had fully embraced her new role as Mrs. Quinn, mistress of the ranch and partner to its owner in every sense of the word. You've changed this place, Wyatt commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of pink and gold. Changed me too, I think. Odessa leaned against his shoulder, content in the moment. For the better, I hope. Definitely for the better, he assured her, his arm tightening around her waist. I didn't realize how lonely I was until you came along, how empty this place felt for all that I loved it. And now it feels like a home, Wyatt said simply. Our home. Odessa smiled, turning her face up to his. I never thought I'd have this, she admitted. After everything with my father, the auction, I was just trying to survive. I didn't dare hope for more. And now, Wyatt echoed her question, his eyes searching hers. Now I have everything, Odessa said softly. More than I ever dreamed possible. The kiss they shared as the last light faded from the sky was a promise and a celebration, a testament to the journey that had brought them together and the life they were building day by day. As the seasons turned, the ranch prospered under their joint care. Wyatt's reputation as a fair employer and skilled cattleman grew, bringing offers of partnership from larger operations that he politely but firmly declined. His vision was not for an empire, but for a sustainable operation that would support his family for generations to come. And family there would be, as Odessa discovered when winter came again to the valley. The news of her pregnancy was met with Wyatt's unbridled joy and a flurry of activity as he set about expanding the cabin to include a proper nursery before the baby's arrival in the spring. A son to inherit the ranch, one of the hands commented when the news spread. Or a daughter, Wyatt corrected without hesitation. Either way, this child will never want for love or security. Odessa, watching him from the porch as he worked on the addition, felt her heart swell with love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. The memory of that day in Redemption Creek seemed impossibly distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. Yet she knew that without that terrible moment, she might never have found her way to this place, to this life, to this love. Spring brought the birth of their daughter, a healthy girl with Wyatt's blue eyes and a tuft of Odessa's auburn hair. They named her Hope, a testament to the feeling that had sustained them both through the darkest times of their lives. She's perfect, Wyatt whispered, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that brought tears to Odessa's eyes. Just like her mother. I think she has your stubbornness, Odessa teased, exhausted but radiant with happiness. She certainly took her time arriving. Wyatt laughed, the sound of pure joy filling the cabin that had truly become a home. As long as she has your courage, we'll be fine. As hope grew, so did the ranch. Wyatt's careful management and Odessa's practical assistance saw their herd increase, their reputation solidify, their operation expand to include a small apple orchard and a vegetable garden that supplied not only their own needs, but provided extra to sell in Cedar Ridge. 2 years after Hope's birth, a son joined the family, William, named for Wyatt's father. The cabin expanded again, and Wyatt began to speak of building a proper house on the rise overlooking the creek. Something that will last for generations, he explained as they sat by the fire one evening, the children asleep in their rooms. Something worthy of the legacy we're building. Odessa, working on a quilt for William's bed, looked up with a smile. I like the sound of that. But I hope you know that this cabin will always be special to me. It's where we began. Wyatt's expression softened as he gazed at her across the room. I do know that, and maybe we keep it even after the new house is built, a reminder of where we started. From a saddle to all this, Odessa mused, setting aside her sewing to join him by the fire. Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Wyatt drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that, even after years of marriage, still made her heart race. I meant what I said that day, he murmured against her mouth. You're worth more than 10 herds, more than anything. So are you, Odessa replied, her fingers tracing the beloved contours of his face. So is this life we've built together. As they held each other in the warm glow of the fire, their children sleeping peacefully nearby, Odessa felt a profound gratitude for the twisting path that had led her to this moment. From the depths of despair on that auction platform to the heights of joy in this cabin, her journey had been one of unexpected turns, and unlooked for blessings. And at the center of it all was Wyatt Quinn, the cowboy who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it, who had risked everything to give her a chance at freedom, who had opened his heart and his home to build a life neither of them could have imagined alone. A life worth more than 10 herds, indeed. A life worth everything.